listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here on a stormy morning in St. Louis with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
That's right. It's storming here, and I'm angry inside.
Wow. Well, that's good to know. I'm glad you put me on notice.
Yeah, so be careful.
Angry inside.
Angry inside.
Are you going to show that on the outside?
Probably not. I rarely do.
So how does one know when Brett is angry inside?
I will tell you.
Oh, so you will announce it, but you won't show it.
Maintain my composure.
That is fantastic emotional regulation. I'm very proud of you.
It's a good skill for counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists to have.
Yes.
Yeah.
It certainly is. And it is important for people in our profession to have skills.
It's required. It's essential.
So we go to school.
There are debates about what skills we are required to have.
Well, that's where I was going. I mean, we go to school and we get degrees and then we get license, and then at some point in the future, there's always the possibility that somebody will come along and say, you're really not qualified to do what you do.
Yes, and the interesting part is, what is the agenda that's driving their opinion? Is it economics? Is it public health and safety? Is it for the better interest of society? I'm always very suspicious of those conversations.
Mm-hmm. So you and I have been invested in this at multiple levels, because we're not just licensed practitioners, but we've also been in the realm of education and even in the realm of running programs that train other people.
Right, and we're both certified by the state to
therapists.
Supervise for licensure.
Right.
So it is presumed by the state and the universities that we have some skills.
Right.
Yeah.
But we've seen this situation. So for people who don't know, what we are talking about is that in the state of Michigan, there was recently a threat to the ability for licensed professional counselors in that state to continue to practice, because they were going to be their ability to diagnose and perform psychotherapy based on those diagnoses was going to be rescinded.
Well, they're all working under, I think it was the 1988 licensure law that hasn't been changed since 1988. And they've all been practicing, those who are licensed, for however long they've had their license. The license requires a certain degree, at least a master's degree or more, from a university, from a certified university. And it requires 2,000 hours of supervised training and I think a year of practice under supervision beyond that, and then you're licensed to go out on your own and do whatever it is you do. So there are 10,000 licensed professional counselors in the state of Michigan who've been working under this rubric all this time. And nobody let's say it differently. Last year, the state regulatory bureau agency that is responsible for assigning licensures decided to go into the licensing law and pull two sentences from one section of the law and reinsert them in another section of the law. The sentences that said it is under your professional competence to do diagnosis and provide psychotherapy, use psychotherapeutic skills, interventions. And they moved those into the section that said you have to be educated in diagnosing and educated in psychotherapeutic skills. All of the universities of which I have knowledge, 3 of which I have taught in, say that provide required courses for people who are trying to get counseling licensures in those areas, in diagnostics and in therapeutic skills. I'm not aware of any that grant the capacity to get a license, and the state regulatory agency comes in and says, well, hey, you've got to jump through all these hoops, and once you've jumped through them, we'll give you the license. But somebody got to that bureau in the state of Michigan and said, we think these people are practicing beyond their competency. So if we move these two, we're not taking anything out of the law. We're just reshuffling the law. And if we shuffle it from one paragraph to another paragraph, then what will happen is all these people that are LPCs will not be able to practice anymore because they don't have the training or the skills that we think they need to have. Not that the law requires anything different, but the legal interpretation is different if it's in a different paragraph. So now the LPCs in Michigan have their hair on fire saying you're going to put us all out of business. Some of us have been practicing 15, 20, 30 years, and you're going to stop us. If you do this, don't do this. And the Bureau is saying, this is a change that's needed to happen for a number of years, and we've talked to you about it. And we finally just decided to do it. So there, live with it.
Now, there was an article that was written a couple of days ago that said that anybody who was currently practicing would be grandfathered in, and then the expectations would change for everybody who got a master's degree going forward. But what does that mean? I mean,
well, if you think about that, as the National Association of Counselors, LPCs, has maintained a consistent perspective on that since they were created, and that is that there are no grandfatherings. Everybody that has an LPC meets the standard qualification, and you don't get grandfathered in. Like, I was practicing in the state of Missouri before Missouri ever passed the license law. When they passed the license law, I had to apply for the licensure. They looked at all my data and they said, you need to take another course. So I had to go back to school and take another course. And when I certified that I had taken that course, they said, well, here's your license. So there was no grandfathering. They didn't say, well, you've already been doing this for 5 years and you haven't been sued, nobody's died or that we know of, and you're good to go. They said, no, you got to meet the conditions. So they don't do grandfathering.
And we're geeking out on this and talking about all of kinds of esoteric kind of inside baseball things because this is really, really important to you and I, maybe even an existential issue for me if I'm going to continue to practice for another 20 years. But we went through this in the state of Missouri in the early 90s. There was a case where a person was working as a therapist in a correctional facility and had written a supportive letter for a convict who was coming up for parole. That individual was paroled and went out and committed some felonies. And then the psychologists and the social workers in the state of Missouri said, see, this is why professional counselors shouldn't be able to diagnose and treat because they're practicing beyond their means. And we went through all of this in the early 90s, and it was settled because for our state, what came out of that is that we adopted a continuing education statute in the law, which didn't exist originally, but was added.
But the law had to be modified.
But the law was modified, right. And we now have to do continuing education, which is perfectly fine. I think continuing education is a fine thing. It wasn't thought about originally, right. And so adding it, I think, makes us stronger as professionals. But that was how we were able to circumvent that crisis. I don't know what Michigan will do. They have passed a law in the House.
State House of Representatives passed a law unanimously this year. They passed it in previous years. I don't know that they passed it unanimously, but they passed it this year unanimously because they've been hearing from 10,000 therapists, LPCs, and 150,000 clients.
I was just going to say, if it's 10,000 therapists, then it's hundreds of thousands of clients.
It's 150,000 clients that are receiving services from LPCs in the state of Michigan. And they're putting pressure on the state House of Representatives, and they said, hey, you know what, we agree. You've been doing this, and we don't see any harm, and we don't think that this should impact it negatively. So they said, okay, now it's got to pass the Senate, and then the governor has to sign it. It has to become a law. It doesn't have a history. It's been proposed 3 times. Doesn't have a history of passing the Senate. Don't know why. Don't know who's riding that train. But they're not getting it out of the Senate. And the state regulatory agency said if it doesn't come out of the Senate, we're doing it unilaterally on our authority. So tough luck.
So what is your understanding of that? If the state regulatory committee does it unilaterally, if the Senate doesn't pass it, then your understanding is that the law goes into effect, and anybody who doesn't have these new requirement expectations is then no longer able to provide services?
And insurance companies will not pay for their services.
Yeah.
So people can't get reimbursed from their insurance company for seeing an LPC. I don't know enough about Michigan per se, so I don't know where that will stand. But it disturbs me. My suspicion is that if they follow these steps, then the next thing is there will be a lawsuit asking for an injunction for the implementation until the courts can say whether or not the regulatory agency has that unilateral authority to make that move.
Right. Right. And, when I was running the graduate program at Webster, the state of New Jersey actually passed a law that said that you had to be a participant and approved by what's called CACREP, which is the Council for the Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs, which is an accrediting body for counseling education programs in the country, much like the APA accredits schools that teach clinical psychology, and you have to go to an APA school to get that licensure. They're trying to push now for this CACREP accreditation. The state of New Jersey passed that law. It only existed for 96 hours, and then it was rescinded because all of the therapists in the state who had not gone to CACREP accredited schools said, what does this mean for us? They couldn't answer that question, so they rescinded the law. But I wonder if we took professional counseling into that arena, if we just made all programs required to be CACREP accredited for their existence and for people to be able to meet the licensure requirements. Do you see that as a fix nationwide? Because I'm afraid that this is just going to happen in every state. It's happened in Michigan, it's happened in Missouri, it's happened in New Jersey.
My concern about that is that I believe master's level licensed counselors provide a niche of service for the marketplace that is essential to the mental health of the United States. And if you go to a CACREP program or CACREP certified program, they're going to push you to get a PhD. So you're not going to have master's level skilled therapists coming out in the marketplace. That does concern me significantly. I don't like the idea being that you have to jump through all of these hoops to get this specified credential before you can practice. I think there's a place for that, and people that want to go and get that should go and get that. And there may be distinctions in whether or not they can service TRICARE or other insurance agencies.
Right.
But I think just in the general marketplace, especially when so many Americans are uninsured, you need a master's level skilled therapist out there providing services in the market.
And that's, I think you hit on exactly the most salient point. When I was at the end of my tenure at Webster, they were going towards their CACREP accreditation. They have now since gotten that, at least provisionally. And the number of hours that were required, so under the current state law, you have to take 48 hours to get master's level trained and licensed. Under CACREP, they wanted to change that to 72, which for me, number one, puts it financially out of the realm of possibility for some people. So some people who would have been able to get licensed at 48 hours wouldn't be able to get licensed at 72 hours. And so I think that it eliminates the number and the diversity of individuals that you're going to have in those programs if you increase the hours that are required to get the credential. And number two, I think that then those individuals who do have that credential now have to charge significantly more because they've amassed a tremendous amount more in student debt, and they want to be compensated for that higher level of education. So I agree. I think that it's going to price out of the marketplace these individuals who are providing, especially in rural communities, the foundation of mental health care at a reasonable cost. I think it's going to make that impossible to be able to continue.
Well, and the other thing too is consider a thing I've always said teaching those programs, whatever your credentials are, it is a market-driven job. If you go out and present yourself and say, I've got all these credentials, come on in, people come in and they spend some time with you and they get a sense that you're safe and you know what you're doing and they will open themselves up and work with you, or they get a sense that you're full of crap and don't know what you're doing and they won't come back. So one of the measures of success is what's your retention ratio. If I get you to come in for 1 to 3 sessions, can I keep you for whatever length of time is required to do the work that needs to be done? But if I work for an agency or a bureaucracy, like I get letters every week from the state prisons in Missouri saying, God, we are in dire need of licensed therapists to work in our prisons. And I'm retired. I mean, I don't even have a practice anymore, but I keep getting these letters saying, come work for us. And all they care about is presuming, because I haven't followed up on any of it. But I have to check the box that I have a license as an LPC in Missouri. They don't know what my work history is. They don't know the populations I've worked with, what any ancillary training I have. They just want somebody licensed to come in. Because this case that you mentioned earlier, I don't think that guy was licensed at the time that it happened.
I don't know. I thought that person was, but again,
He
this
worked
was so
for
long
the
ago.
state
Right.
and his title was counselor, but he wasn't a licensed professional counselor.
Gotcha. Then I don't know how they were able to.
Well, that's
move
why
against.
the case didn't hold.
Yeah, but again, so I just want to say as a disclaimer, we know that this is really esoteric in the weeds,
It's in the
baseball,
weeds,
inside baseball. But the reason that we feel like that it's important to address on this podcast is because there are millions of Americans in this country right now who are being treated by master level trained psychotherapists, and it's an affordable option for them. They might not need to get medicated, so they don't need to go to a psychiatrist. They might not, be able to afford a really, really expensive clinical psychologist who's charging, twice the rate. And so this is a really, really convenient option for them. And if these individuals are put out of the marketplace, it isn't just a question of, now, a bunch of licensed clinical social workers and licensed psychologists are going to rush in to fill that void. There's going to be too large a void to be able to fill. We know that there are more people needed to provide mental health counseling in the United States than there are people who are doing it.
Right.
And so if you then eliminate literally millions of people who are currently doing it, or at least hundreds of thousands of people who are currently doing it, that void is going to be untenable.
Well, and then the market also impacts it. I mean, there are a number of people, I know a number of friends who have LPC licensures who no longer practice as LPC mental health providers. They practice as life coaches.
Right.
Because right now, life coach is not a licensed, restrictive title.
Right.
There are different organizations within that community that certify you to be a life coach. You can go to whichever one you want and say, well, I'm a certified life coach. But that doesn't mean anything in terms of the state of the law. The distinctions are in terms of the ability to protect yourself from a lawsuit, or the terms of the requirements to behave in certain ways. If I'm functioning as a counselor, licensed professional counselor, and you come and see me, and you're talking about managing your budget at home, I can talk to you about how do you make financial decisions, what are your resources, what are your obligations, what's your strategy for resolving them, but I can't take your checkbook and pay your bills or advise you to buy this annuity or this retirement program that I'm selling, but a life coach can. And so a number of people in our business, some of them couldn't earn a living as mental health practitioners who've gone to life coach, and some who could, but also decided the life coach is less stressful and offers more opportunities to do the work they want to do with people outside the tight frame.
But that's the rub, isn't it?
Yes.
Is that they have the latitude to do whatever they want to do,
Right.
but then the individual client doesn't have the protection of an ethical code and legal statutes that limit what that person can do. And the reason that those limits are there is to protect that client from harm. And to give them a recourse to be able to go and say, this person harmed me and I want something done about it.
And or to protect the right of the individual to control access to the marketplace.
Yeah.
You have to come and see me because insurance won't pay for you to be a life coach, but insurance will pay for you to see me as a
Right.
therapist.
Yes.
Part of why they do that is I have some boundaries and restrictions that the life coach doesn't have. Now, I'm doing good quality work, whatever I call myself, but you need to think your way through that if you want third-party payment for reimbursement, or you think you might want to sue me someday.
Right.
Which way is that likely to go? And also within our community, whether it's social workers, marriage counselors, licensed professional counselors, whatever it is, there are lots of arguments among the providers saying you shouldn't be able to work with this population. You shouldn't be able to work with LGBTQ because you don't have a certificate. You shouldn't be able to work with adolescents because you don't have a certificate. You shouldn't be able to do marriage counseling because you don't have a certificate from our certification agency. But the state law says you can.
Right.
And they don't like that.
And so we're just saying that we think that people should be aware of these
Yes.
issues, just because, if the people who are pushing these kind of agendas have their way, there's going to be this void. And if you are a person who gets therapy from a licensed professional counselor, just be aware that these things are happening. They're happening in some states. They might happen in other states, and it might impact you. And what I would like to see happen is for us to have a dialogue that would resolve this once and for all at a national level, so that we didn't have to just go state by state by state and have some kind of individual resolution.
And I would urge that one of the ingredients required for an effective resolution is a requirement for continuing education.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you ever finished getting educated about human beings and what goes on with them.
I agree.
And that you need specific courses and regular courses
Right.
to keep your mind sharp.
Right. Now, I take for granted that, I do therapy every day, and then I also teach every day, or at least every week. And so between those two things, I'm always preparing myself and keeping up to date on what I have to know to be able to teach classes. So I kind of take that for granted, but I can totally see how somebody who's just doing therapy would get very, very comfortable in that, milieu of just doing therapy and never read a book. I mean, not that they're bad people, or not that they don't care, or not that they're inquisitive, but, why would they do that extra effort?
Yeah.
Right. And so the idea that we are doing this continuing education, I am all for. I absolutely agree. I think every professional, I think medical doctors should be doing that. I think dentists should be doing that.
And they're required to by law.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's at least the minimum concession that
Yes.
could be made to
I would
resolve this at a national level. So anyway, hopefully this wasn't too boring for people, and that maybe it sparked some thinking, and maybe you'll go out and actually check out what are the credentials of the person that you see for psychotherapy, and actually have a conversation with them. I heard this about what was going on in Michigan. How do you see this affecting you, and what is the future of this in either the state of Missouri or nationwide? And if you have questions for us, obviously, always we welcome questions, comments, input. If you want to be a guest on the show, give us a holler at www.psychwithmike.com. You can follow the show on Twitter at psychwithmike, or follow us on Facebook at psychwithmike. And all the music that is performed on Psych with Mike is written by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and I always thank him for his participation. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.